A leap. It was past midnight. It was too late, for sure, for someone to be phoning, but Diana wasn't sure how late. She hoped it wasn't her phone, but Marty's. In any case, she simply put a pillow over her face and audibly thanked me when it stopped after the 5th ring. The ringing resumed soon as she was becoming comfy. She shouted, "Damn it," as she opened her eyes once more. "Martin, answer your goddamn." Her spouse wasn't in bed with her, and the words abruptly ceased. She took her phone off the nightstand, looked at the time, and wondered why her spouse wasn't in bed yet. A few hours earlier, when they had gone to bed, he had been there. She said into the phone, "Yes, hello, hello. Is this Diana Miller?" "It is, indeed. Who is this?" "You are Martin's wife." "Yes, please God, yes." "Who is this?" "Mrs. Miller, this is Northtown Medical Center's emergency room. We still had your contact information from the event a year ago, and your husband was hauled in about an hour ago. He was involved in an incident. Is there any way you could come down immediately?" "Oh my God, is he all right?" "Ma'am, I'm not allowed to talk about his condition on the phone. Would you kindly descend?" "Yes, without a doubt. I'll try my best to get there." Dallas, named after the city in which she was conceived, was a sophomore who didn't think living near campus would be beneficial to her studies, so she ran upstairs where her daughter was sleeping. Dallas was attending the local university but wasn't living there to save money. "Dal, get awake." "Nothing." "Awaken, Dale." Despite giving her a gentle prod on the shoulder, nothing changed. "Dallas, awaken." The light in the room was on, and Dallas sat up straight in bed, trying to force her bleary eyes to concentrate. It had been a short night. "Your father was involved in an accident, Dallas. He is currently at the ER. You must put on some clothes. We had to leave." It wasn't like they had never seen each other bare before. She rolled out of bed, pulled off her nightshirt over her head, and forgot she was 20 years old and standing bare in front of her mother, stretching to her full 5 feet 4 inches tall, her left hand inadvertently scratching the stubbled brown hair that was growing in on her mons. She had to shave badly. Diana, on the other hand, was too preoccupied to notice because she was getting dressed from Dallas' drawers. As soon as they felt safe enough, the two women drove to the hospital after getting dressed. Dallas began barging her mother with inquiries about what had transpired, but Diana was only able to provide the details she had already provided. Considering how little traffic there was at this time of night or morning, it seemed like a lifetime before they arrived, although it was really just 10 minutes. Diana swerved the car at an awkward angle to fit in with the entry, but it didn't matter because they jumped out of the car and went inside. When they were shown to Martin's room, they were astounded by his state. He was obviously unconscious and heavily bandaged. They were handed forms to complete. "You still have to complete papers notwithstanding your loss." Dallas shifted her chair to put her father closer to her. After approximately an hour, a man and a woman dressed in police clothes came in. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were first on the scene of your husband's accident. Any word on how he's doing?" Diana said, "No one has said anything to us, officer." "Oh, this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you a few questions. I know the timing is bad, but it's best to do it as soon as possible." "Of course. Do you know what your husband was doing out this time of night?" "That's the funny thing. He was home and we went to bed together at around 10 p.m. I didn't even know he wasn't there until the hospital called." Officer Stanton addressed Dallas as ma'am. "Can you confirm that?" "Actually, I can. We had been watching a movie on TV that ended at 10, and then we all went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bedroom with Mom." "What movie?" inquired the cop. "Something with Keanu Reeves. Some action movie. Dad picked it. It was his turn." "Were you folks having any particular issues? Financial problems, maybe? Or marital?" "Nothing that all married couples don't face." "No particular problems, no. I just don't understand why he was out without me knowing." "Are the people in the other car hurt?" "Well, that's the thing, Mrs. Miller. This was a one-car accident. And according to both witnesses, your husband's vehicle was driving normally and then rather suddenly accelerated directly into the large oak tree that sits at the corner of highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks and no one recalls seeing brake lights. When Diana and Dallas realized what the cops were recommending, they turned to face them. "Are you suggesting that my spouse attempted suicide or that he did this on purpose?" "Of course, we'll need to talk with your husband when he wakes up, and we still need to check the car for any mechanical problems." "Yes, that is one possibility we are definitely thinking about." "Are you certain there weren't any issues that came to mind?" "Officers, my spouse and I have an amazing marriage, and I adore him greatly. No, as far as I can tell, nothing is wrong. This was probably simply him losing his temper or nodding off. It was becoming late. There definitely is a sensible." Dallas closed the door to Martin's room for privacy, and Officer Stanton set one of Diana's cards on a table and asked them to call if they thought of anything more before they left the hospital. Diana started crying and could not finish her sentence. "You kept it from them." Her mother stopped crying and said, "No, Dallas, I didn't. It's none of their business and had nothing to do with this. Your father approved of it. If it did, when they speak with him, he will say something." Then, we'll cross that bridge. Days passed slowly for everyone over the next few days. Martin was still comatose and had been admitted to the hospital. Diana and Dallas tried to spend as much time there as they could, frequently alone but together, making sure he was never left alone. Luckily, Diana was acquainted with Martin's supervisor, so she called him to inform him of the situation and that he would not be able to report to work. She was cautious not to mention anything that would lead someone to believe that Martin had attempted suicide. After the accident on Saturday night, Sunday morning, Martin gradually began to show symptoms of consciousness on Wednesday morning. By the afternoon, his eyes were open, but he was limited to looking around by all the medical equipment attached to him. After a few seconds, a nurse ran into the room, something on the monitors warning her that her patient was awake, and Diana went back to her seat to let the nurse finish her work. Diana was there and saw, hurrying to his bedside to comfort him that everything would be okay. As soon as additional medical staff entered the room to check on Martin, Diana used the chance to go outside and contact Dallas to inform her that her father had woken up. When Dallas did not pick up, she left a message on her voicemail. Martin's left arm was broken, but he was right-handed and did not think it would hinder him too much. His throat was raw from the tube, so he was given a whiteboard so he could communicate. The nurse read the message and asked if he was certain. Martin nodded his head. Soon, most of the medical equipment was removed. While the exams carried on, the nurse hurried into the hallway. "Mrs. Miller, I have to let you know that your husband has requested that you not enter his room again, nor your daughter." "What? I have the right to be in there with my husband since he is mine." "I apologize, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's desires take precedence. Let me just speak with him. Together, we can resolve this." Diana shouted because she was unable to get close to the nurse despite her best efforts. Martin, speak with me, please. What is happening?" Martin, Mrs. Please stop yelling. Miller, our other patients are being disturbed by you. You are free to wait outside the room at this point, but if we find you trying to enter it or making noise, we will have you escorted from the premises. Do I make sense?" "Yes, you're clear," Diana answered, having no other option. 45 minutes later, Dallas arrived at the hospital and discovered her mother seated in a chair outside the room. "Why are you out here, Mom? Your dad has forbidden us from entering the room. The two of us. Though I see why he would prohibit you. Why me? What in the world does that signify? Why did it take you so long to arrive here? Bradley came over to check on me just after I woke up. Kind of. Oh my God. Instead of supporting your father, you were taking advantage of your boyfriend." Dallas said, "Sorry, Mom, but he was still unconscious when I left. This has been really stressful and I needed," in a tone that did not convey regret, "to decompress. For what it was worth, it really did work out well. You ought to give us a call as soon as you can." "Not in Dallas. I will not act in that manner. And let's leave that conversation for now. It's impolite." Dallas laughed at the irony. A knock on the door announced the arrival of a tall, very lovely brunette, who, despite not looking like a doctor, was clearly a staff member thanks to her badge. "Greetings, Mr. Miller. One of the mental health specialists at the hospital is me, Doctor. What state are you in? As well as can be expected, I suppose." 9 days had passed since the mishap. He was able to speak again, and the whiteboard was no longer an issue. He had inquired about his potential release date but never received a clear response. "Thus far, the hospital has asked me to spend some time speaking with you. Would that be all right? Do I have a choice?" The psychiatrist said, "Not if you want to go home anytime soon. I do have to clear you to be released," with a puzzled smile. "Then let's get this going." The doctor crossed her long legs and sat down after bringing a chair over to the bedside. She studied the file she was carrying for a few minutes. "Okay, so you were brought in a little over a week ago following an accident that involved you and a large tree. I also see that you've banned your wife and daughter from visiting, and I suspect those things are somehow related." Martin answered, "Got it in one. She'd been cheating on me. Unfortunately, not a rare occurrence these days, though it rarely leads to this kind of reaction. Is there more to it?" Martin remained silent for a few moments. Especially with a gorgeous female doctor, he really didn't want to talk about this. He pondered whether they had an elderly man he could have a conversation with. Physician with patients. She had to wait for someone to initiate conversation before on previous occasions. Her perseverance paid off. "I was suffering from depression, I guess. Nothing that was diagnosed or anything. I was just, well, like I said, depressed. About anything in particular, or just in general. I haven't been able to get up since. In a little over a year. Since the previous accident, right?" She knew, of course. She most likely held his entire medical file in her hands. All she wanted was for him to say it. "All right, not even a serious accident happened. My boss was in the passenger seat, his boss was driving, and I was in the rear seat. Something hit us in the back. I had not been prepared for it, yet there were no airbags and not even a lot of damage. I struck my head on the seat in front of me and suffered whiplash. That, I assume, is what caused it." The doctor chimed in, "The report says you had whiplash and a mild concussion. My physicians were unable to diagnose it. Not a single one of the medications had any effect. After a battery of tests, some of which were repeated, the best explanation I was given was that something had happened to cause damage to a portion of my brain. So, you couldn't make it work, which finally made your wife unhappy with your life and caused her to start seeing someone else. You ultimately became tired of this, which is what caused that evening's events. Is it approximately correct? In summary, sure. And when did your wife finally take that action? I would say 7 or 8 months. We attempted to take care of things and obtain some toys for role-playing. The infiltration. Mr. Miller, I know how it operates. I've shared a bed with someone before. Sorry, of course. It makes me feel a little uneasy. That was all right at first, but we were still holding out hope for my ability would return. We would discuss spending the entire weekend in bed and having a great time. Of course, that never did occur. It eventually got to the point that she made the decision to seek care elsewhere. Had she spoken to you about this before? Not at all. I learned about it when I arrived home early from work. I realize it's a trite cliche. In addition to being at home with her partner, my daughter was also there with her boyfriend. Were they acting in unison? Doctor inquired, clearly showing amazement in her voice. No, I'm quite grateful. Brad and Dallas were in the living room, and Diana and Bill were in the bedroom. That's how I discovered my wife was having an extramarital affair. My daughter was aware of it and seemed to have given her approval, which clarifies why your daughter was also prohibited. Indeed. Oh, and in case I missed it earlier, Brad's father is Bill. As the father of our daughter's lover, we had a passing familiarity with him. Later on, I learned that Dallas was the one who recommended Bill to her mother. That's an additional blow. Have you addressed them? That's not correct, then. Dallas's presence may have prevented me from confronting Diana, but I had already witnessed enough of my daughter's physical appearance. I waited till that evening after leaving. How went that? Not what I had anticipated. Although she expressed regret that I found out, she made it plain that she would find someone else to look after her if I was unable to, and that she would much rather have a regular partner than constantly having to find someone new. She chose Bill because he was single and shared her wants. What actions did you take? What actions could I take? She was correct when she said that I couldn't handle business. She took care of business because it wasn't her fault that I was unable to perform. What if, just in case, she had questioned you first? Had you consented? You know, I've given that a lot of thought, and a part of me wanted to say that since I loved her and wanted her to be happy, I would have been understanding. However, I doubt that I could have tolerated it. In sickness or health was one of the promises and vows we made. I couldn't stand it if she did that to me because I wouldn't have done it to her. She obviously kept seeing them. Clearly, she was also less circumspect about it now that I knew about it. Although it was only done during the day when I was at work, there were now weekend trips to the shop, and part of that time was obviously spent with Bill. I'm not sure if she started doing it more frequently because I'm not sure how often they'd been doing it before. That had to have been challenging. It's not even close to being difficult. Once more, though, I didn't think I had any options. I was dying myself over it all, but I couldn't give her the physical life she deserved. Tell me about the accident night. As a family, we had watched a movie on TV. We still experienced those evenings and times. I kept the emotional suffering I was experiencing to myself. That was probably a mistake, but I didn't want to bother Dallas or Diana. They had a kiss and an embrace before Dallas left, and I received a good night from her. That's when I guess I understood she no longer respected me as a man and as a father. Since I didn't respect myself either, it was hard for me to blame her. Everything was the same as it always was, every night, the same thing. I got ready for bed like normal, and Diana did the same. I waited for Diana to fall asleep before getting dressed and grabbing my wallet and keys. I went upstairs and took a quick peek at Dallas' room, where she was sound asleep, and I bid her farewell with a kiss. I went and got into my car. I knew it had airbags, but I thought if I hit hard enough it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan but just drove around. I was aware of the big oak tree, but it wasn't my immediate destination. I drove by it the first time and realized there were no barriers and there was a pretty straight approach available. I drove around again and went straight for it. For some minutes, they sat in silence, giving their minds time to comprehend the story. The doctor finally said something. Mr. Miller, I want to thank you being so open and honest with me today. That's something of a rarity. I'm going to let you get some rest and take some time to process what you've told me. Would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? He joked, I'm not going anywhere. The doctor departed the room after they shook hands. After he banned Diana, Martin took up his cell phone, which he had left at home that evening, and responded to a few texts and emails. Providing an update to his employer was part of that. After then, he tried to go asleep by closing his eyes. Diana was attempting to maintain composure at home. It had seemed to her that Marty was okay with her spending time with Bill, that he had given it to her as a token of his affection. Even at the time she learned of the event, but now she wasn't so sure. She hoped her husband had not mentioned anything about her friendship with Bill, but she believed he had spoken to the police. Though it wasn't legally illegal to have slept outside of marriage, the police hadn't been in touch with her again, so perhaps they just chalked it up to a suicide attempt and called it good. Closed case. Nevertheless, he had never really complained. Had he not? She couldn't recall if he did. Furthermore, she had no intention of leading a chaste life simply because a fool chose to unseat her husband's superior. She had not agreed to that, and she was not going to consent to it now. She would definitely not be giving it up, but she would definitely be more sensitive to Marty's sentiments and secretive about her hours with Bill once he got home. The doctor came by as promised in the morning. She got up and did the same thing, pulling in 2 of the plain-looking but solid chairs from each room. Marty laughed as he watched, and observed how nicely the good doctor had fit the skirt around his ass. Unfortunately, tiny Marty stayed quiet. "How are you this morning, Mr. Miller?" "Not much change from yesterday, Doc. Ready to go home, but I guess that's up to you." "Well, partially, but there is a 72-hour hold on you as required by state law that didn't technically start until you and I started our conversation yesterday. So, 2 more days at least." "That's fine, Doc. At least the food here isn't half bad." "It's all bad," they joked among themselves, chuckling. "An oldie, but a goodie," said the physician. "But I'm glad to see you making jokes." "Me too. It's been a while, and by a while I mean months, since I felt like myself. I used to be quite the jokester, to the point of getting on Dallas' nerves sometimes. Have we thought negative thoughts or followed any other strange paths in our minds?" "You know I haven't, Doctor. I was very depressed for a year, and I've been really depressed for the last several months. That no longer feels like me. It's been replaced by disappointment, frustration, and rage. Mostly with myself for not speaking out for myself and for not making it obvious to my wife that what she was doing was unacceptable, but also with Diana and Dallas, especially Diana. Are you going to make that decision right now?" "Yes, without a doubt. I have to take some of the responsibility for allowing her walk all over me, even if I freely admit to being tempted to just file for divorce. However, I'm willing to see a counselor and work to mend our marriage if she's willing to stop dating Bill." "Mr. Miller, I can respect your perseverance. This kind of speedy turnaround is uncommon for me. Before you entered, I had plenty of time to reflect as I was lying here. Thank you for allowing me to express it and tell someone about it. It made it possible for me to concentrate. Mr. Miller, this is really fantastic. If so, I'm going to end our conversation now. I can make advantage of the time as I have a few more patients than I did yesterday. I'll drop by tomorrow for a last conversation, but there's no reason why you can't depart on time. I'm excited about it, Doctor." When he was freed, Dallas and Diana were waiting for him. If he was going to attempt to reconstruct things, he had to begin by acting as though they would be rebuilt. The worst of it was the concussion he suffered, which necessitated spending a lot of time resting and recuperating in the dark, with the television turned off and soft music playing in the background while his wife and daughter cooed over him. The airbags had been remarkably effective, far more so than Marty had anticipated. For a little more than a week, everything was going great until Diana said she had to go shopping. "No," Marty replied coolly. "What?" "Marty, there are things we need, including some of your therapy creams," Diana responded, perplexed. "For Dallas, compile a list. She is free to leave." "Dad, why are you including me in this? In addition, I'm going to see Bradley. So you'll have an incentive to get your shopping done quickly, won't you?" "Diana, a rundown." "Martin, this is crazy. You cannot simply return home and change the way we operate. I'm going to the grocery and Dallas has plans, and that's all." "Diana, do you think I'm stupid? Ignorant?" "Of course not, Marty. Why would you pose such a question? Do you really think I'm unaware that I use these shopping excursions as justifications to visit Bill?" "Martin, I've never failed to bring groceries home. Not even once." "Yes, and the cover turned out really well. However, you've been gone for much too long, and I can see it in you as well. In your eyes when you turn away from me, in your attire when it doesn't look quite right, in your makeup, which is consistently a tad off. It used to be that at least some of the time was spent with Bill, but that is no longer the case." Dallas saw the obvious shock in Diana's eyes and felt a quick surge of respect for her father. "Marty, please, this is nothing new to us. I'll try my best to be more cautious from now on. Clearly, I got a little too comfortable with my gatherings. I'm not giving him up, though. I intend to have a bodily life, to which I am entitled. So, our promises were for naught, abandoning every other, in health or in illness. This is the sick part, and no, you are not abandoning people. But from now on, you will. You will no longer visit Bill, and in order to save our marriage, we will both consult a counselor. Or we won't, and you won't, and on Monday I'll give the divorce lawyer a call. Martin Miller, you won't act in such a manner. You have no right to threaten me. I would have slept with you alone if I could have, but I'm not allowed to. It's not my fault either. The accident was not my fault. Not that I was there. My physical life is gone all of a sudden for no reason I had anything to do with, and I'm just supposed to accept that. Not likely to occur. I will therefore be seeing Bill, going shopping, and taking care of my necessities. We can discuss this further if you'd like to do so tonight, but don't even try to tell me what I can and cannot do." Without waiting for her husband to say anything more, Diana marched out her front door and shut it with a crash that rattled the windows. The silence was eerie, the father and daughter exchanging glances before Marty disappeared into his bedroom. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller was concerned about the future of her family, the future of her parents' marriage. Her father had never really challenged her mother. But then, there had never been a serious issue between them. Still, believing there was nothing she could do and that it was between them, she got dressed and went to see Bradley. Diana reclined on her back. Diana climbed up beside Bill and they cuddled close, and as she relaxed, she realized that although Bradley was a lazy slob, Bill could sleep. Oh, so much sleep, and if Bradley inherited even a tiny bit of that, then she could see the young man's attraction to Dallas. When Dallas returned to the family home, it was getting dusk outside and she found her dad curled up in his bedroom. She noticed a faint glow coming from the bathroom, where the door was cracked and the light was on. Dallas realized her dad wanted a little light, but none of the fixtures in the room went that low. "Papa." He didn't roll over, he answered with his back to her. "Dallas, I apologize." That got his attention. He sat up gingerly in bed and looked around to see his daughter in the doorway, weeping softly. "What are you sorry for?" Though she was crying, he couldn't help but assume that this was all set up. He had stopped calling her all the cutesy terms he used to say when he learned that she had assisted her mother in finding a lover and was reluctant to do so now. Dallas moved in closer until she was standing directly at the bed's foot. "I apologize for my actions. You know, I was only trying to be helpful to Mom. She was quite angry at what you were going through and your inability to cope." Their eyes locked for a moment. "You know what, though? You couldn't." And ever since Mrs. Coyle passed away, Bradley's father had been experiencing the same thing. Bradley claims that his father frequently expresses how much he misses her, particularly their closeness. "I assumed they could look out for one another. I apologize. I never considered the impact it might have on you." "Is it? Why are you doing that?" "Fulfilled your nighttime plans." This might still be a trap, but Marty had to take her confession at face value. If he was duped, hurt, or tricked again, so be it. This unexpected outpouring from his daughter astonished him. "Mostly, I believe. Regardless, I was pretty depressed because I couldn't. You know what I was unable to do." Once more, the father and daughter locked eyes and exchanged a fleeting smile. "But, Dally, it is now behind us. I promise not to repeat that action." "Hopefully not. You are still needed by me." "Mom, are you getting a divorce?" "Sweetheart, I haven't made any final decisions, but if she keeps seeing Bill, I don't see any other outcome. However, don't mention that to anyone. She must change, but not because she must, but because she wants to." "All right, Dad. I'm heading upstairs now." "What?" "Bradley and I broke up tonight." Though Marty had never been much of a fan of the boy, he was taken aback by her apparent infatuation with him, or what had once passed for it. "Why?" Curious about this turn of events, Marty asked. Dallas said, "Because," pausing for a moment before continuing, "my dad once told me he wasn't good enough for me, and at last I understood he was correct. It dawned on me at last that my father was correct in a lot of ways." Marty grinned, realizing that his little girl had matured a lot in just a short while. Dallas approached her father and hugged him, realizing it was their first embrace in a long time. Eventually, they moved apart, grinned at each other, and Marty watched her walk upstairs and out of the room. The positive feelings that had just made him happy vanished in an instant, and Marty laid back down and closed his eyes. No sooner had he heard his daughter's bedroom door close than he heard Diana remotely locking her car. Diana had showered at Bill's and Marty figured it was better for her to return freshly showered rather than smelling of camaraderie, even though they would have both known exactly what Diana had been up to. Moments later, Diana stepped into the bedroom. "Would you please assist with the groceries?" "Are there really groceries?" Marty sat up and laughed. "Indeed, Marty. I did as I said I would and got groceries." She had checked out of the grocery store almost 2 hours ago, shopping first, then off to see Bill, it seemed, but even though Marty knew it was going to happen, the evidence in front of him still hurt. He hauled the bags in from the car and emptied them onto the counter, noting that there were no refrigerated or frozen items. It was all to stock the pantry. With everything tucked away, Marty entered the bedroom and, without saying another word, lay down, wondering if it would even be worthwhile to bring up the subject again. Diana had made it very obvious what she was going to do, so the next problem was going to be his answer. Something had to change. "Did you wish to continue speaking?" With a tone that suggested it wouldn't help, his wife questioned. "Diana, no. You said clearly where you stand." Diana's tone and face softened. She really didn't think arranging for her own satisfaction, given the circumstances, should be a problem. She really loved her husband and didn't want to lose him. He was still her best friend and the person she most enjoyed spending time with, and she hoped that Marty would eventually feel the same way. "Are you in the mood to eat?" She interrupted him in mid-thought to inquire. "Not at all. While you were out, I prepared some fettuccine. I assume you had a salad. It seems like you haven't been eating enough vegetables lately." "I made some spinach, but no salad." Diana nodded and went to her wardrobe to get dressed, thinking of having some intimacy again with her husband, something that had been sorely lacking. But this was not the night. Marty was sleeping by the time Diana changed into her pajamas, or at least feigning it. The divorce was not an easy process. When the papers arrived, Diana became enraged. Marty had kindly had them sent to the house and had made it a point to go out with Dallas at that very moment. having moved into the upstairs guest room adjacent to Dallas's room. Diana put up a fierce fight against the divorce, hiring a highly aggressive lawyer who went all out to try and get him deemed mentally incompetent, citing his suicide attempt. The same week the papers were served, Marty entered counseling because he thought it would be a good idea and because he anticipated she might try something like that. The respected psychologist he was seeing testified Marty was most definitely no longer a suicide risk, and the judge accepted that, and it became a non-issue. The argument may have lasted much longer, but just when Diana looked like she was going to give up, Dallas stepped in and told her mother that they had been wrong, that Diana's needs did not come before the promises and vows she had made, that life isn't always fair, and that she should have stood by her husband and suffered with him, and that any more resistance would harm their relationship going forward, possibly irreversibly. Diana gave up opposing the divorce because she believed she had no other option after losing both her husband and her daughter. The house was sold. Marty agreed to pay alimony for a few years knowing that a judge would order it anyhow, and Diana moved into a 2-bedroom apartment close to her workplace, which she was able to occupy full-time 8 months after the divorce became final. However, the divorce had left Diana bitter and angry, particularly after Bill informed her that they were done, as it appeared he was taking advantage of a few other women, and Diana's appeal vanished once she was no longer married. Dallas continued her education as a commuter student, spending alternate nights with both parents. However, over time, Diana's victimization and continued blaming Marty for the split made her want to cry. If she had heard her mother say, if only he had been more understanding, one more time, she would have lost her mind. And Marty, well, about 10 o'clock at night, Marty entered the dimly lit club. It was a Friday night, and he was just looking for a quick fix. He wanted to have a few drinks and maybe dance a little. He had been acting so unlike himself lately, and he wanted to change that. Sitting at the bar, he ordered a rum and cola. As he sipped his drink, he looked around at the people he was with that night and recognized a face he couldn't quite place, a woman with long, dark brown hair whose dress barely covered her front. She had a nearly empty wine glass in front of her. Marty stared at the woman, thinking backwards, and then, after a few minutes, something clicked in his mind. He smiled slightly and took up his drink, handling it with care as he walked toward her. The woman turned to face him at that moment. Medical professional. Marty felt maybe he had the wrong person as she scrutinized his face for a moment, looking him in the eyes, but not showing any signs of recognition right away. I dropped the doctor off at the hospital. It's Vicky out here in the real world. However, I fear that you are taking advantage of me. I know you speak with a lot more patience than I do attractive psychologists, but it has been a while. I'm far more adept at names than faces. Give me a try. Miller Martin. Vicky considered the name for a moment, and Marty observed her intently, and if you questioned him afterward, he would swear he saw a light bulb go on in her head. Marty patiently waited for her to concede defeat. Oh, Mr. Miller. And, if my memory serves me well, an infidelity-prone wife and a very abrupt crash into a tree. You're not wrong, and I'm in awe. We hadn't spoken in over a year, nearly 2 years, when we did. It's a present. Would you like to come with me? Marty sat down and motioned for the bartender to refill their glasses. Thank you. It's my pleasure. So, what brings you out tonight? Meeting someone, replied Marty. Vicky replied, trying to, with a gleam in her eye that made it obvious what she meant. Really, I thought I recalled a rather impressive rock on your finger back then. You may have. That's a little before my divorce was final. I was wearing my rings while trying to convince my husband, ex-husband, that he really didn't have anything in common with a 20-year-old cashier except a willingness to have one of her friends join them in bed. I'm afraid I wasn't successful. Oh my, are they still together? This may come as some surprise to you, Mr. Miller, but after my divorce was finalized, I completely lost interest in Wayne's relationship status. I haven't the faintest idea. Of course, it was a silly question. And please call me Marty or Martin. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you? Marty. Well then, Martin. Would you care to show me to the dance floor? I'd be delighted. Martin took Vicky's hand and led her to the floor, asking the bartender to store their drinks safely behind the bar. They rapidly settled into the swing of the lively song. One quick song gave way to another, and then a softer one began. Throughout the slow song, they remained on the floor, holding each other tightly. Martin's hands were pressed hard against Vicky's back, and Vicky had her hands around his neck. Martin, being a boy, noticed the absence of a bra right away. Vicky put her head on his shoulder after they had exchanged long looks. Additionally, there were 2 slow songs that followed one another, and they never relaxed when the second song began. Martin couldn't get enough of this soft, lovely woman who smelled so good. Vicky used a little pause in music volume as the song was ending to express a few things. She said, Martin, I am one needy woman, in his ear. How about taking me back to your place and doing something about that? After shaking hands, Martin went back to the bar, paid the bill, and informed the bartender that they were done using the beverages. He seems unsurprised. They got into his car and Martin drove back to the condo he had bought, since she had taken an Uber to the club. Though it was little, he was glad he was done worrying about mowing the lawn. Vicky, maybe I'm asking this a little late, but how much have you had to drink? That was my first glass of wine on the bar when you walked up. Why? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women. No worries there, Martin. After parking in his subterranean garage, they rode the elevator to his floor. Vicky clung to him the whole time, and they exchanged a few intense kisses here and there. Vicky grabbed the underside of her dress and yanked it off over her head as soon as the door closed. Martin was taken aback by the absence of underwear, as he had anticipated there wouldn't be any bra. Vicky's figure, from her long, brown hair to her enormous, full breasts to her thick, dark brown bush to her long, strong legs, was something he openly adored. My God, Vicky, you're stunning. Thank you, Martin. But are you just going to look, or are you going to touch? Oh, definitely touch. Then show me to your bedroom. Taking her hand, Martin walked her down the hallway. Dallas's stay with her mother this weekend was fortunate, but he could have made other plans if necessary. Vicky was on the bed, lying on her back. Martin pondered about saying something, but Vicky's velvety warmth felt too lovely, and he could always handle the fallout, in his opinion. However, he didn't have to worry because she just took a few strokes before stopping. She smiled and added, just wanted to feel the real thing for a minute, before shoving her into Martin's face and putting his D in her mouth. Martin had been a little let down when they immediately fell asleep, since he had wanted to taste her. But everything turned out for the best. After an amazing and continuous bonding session that lasted for over an hour, they eventually fell asleep. Vicky was curled up against Martin on his left side as he lay on his back. They were lounging in that strange transitional state between sleep and wakefulness, not quite asleep. Vicky raised her head, and Martin felt rather than saw. Martin, it just occurred to me that there was an erectile dysfunction side to your story. Am I remembering that right? I was wondering if you'd remember that. I thought so. Obviously, that's not an issue anymore. What happened? A couple of months after the incident with the oak tree, I started feeling a tingle is how I described it. It was how I think it would feel when a paralyzed limb starts to regain feeling. That went on for a few weeks, and then one day I woke with morning wood. It didn't last very long, but it was there. Were you still married at this point? Did you say anything to your wife? Legally married, yes, but it was just about over. We had been living apart for several weeks, and no, I didn't say anything. It was none of her business. Over the next few months I started getting morning time more and more often, and even got one occasionally during the day. After 8 or 9 months things were pretty much back to normal. What did the doctors say? They didn't have an answer, not a real one at least. They ran all kinds of tests and scans and compared to the same ones I had when it wasn't working, and there was nothing they could point to. They ultimately attributed it to a quirk of the brain. Do they believe that hitting the tree, or, I suppose, your head, fixed the issue? They simply are ignorant. Either the tree or the brain's natural mending process could have been the cause. It is impossible to know. Well, I'm lucky that way. I take it that staying the night is acceptable. How else are we going to reconnect over breakfast and enjoy bonding time in the morning? Martin put the blankets over them both and they fell asleep, having made their best effort to get away from the damp area. However, Martin had one more question. Vicky, do you believe you're prepared for a meaningful relationship again? There was a long moment of silence, and Martin half expected her to jump out of the bed and demand to be taken home, so scared had he been of her actual fear. She was obviously beautiful to him, not just in terms of appearance. She was smart and he enjoyed her company. It wasn't love yet, but it was the first woman since his divorce that he had even entertained the possibility of. Could we discuss that in the morning? Yes. Vicky, good night. Martin, good night. Vicky got up before Martin did, and because he seemed content, she decided to let him sleep. After taking advantage of his shower, she walked into the kitchen to see what she might cook for breakfast. She had been telling herself for months that she didn't need a man in her life, and on some level that was true. She had a good job and some great friends, so she didn't need a man, but if she was completely honest with herself, she did want one. But would a decent guy even want her after she told him the truth? That was why she was surprised by Martin's question right before bed. The fragrance of cooking woke Martin, and when he staggered into the kitchen, he saw that Vicky had taken advantage of his shirt from the previous evening and had located the apron he had been keeping in his cupboard. I had planned to treat you to breakfast. It's too late at this point. I'd want to go to lunch with you. Once you take a brief shower, breakfast will be ready. Vicky was setting out plates on the table 10 minutes later when Martin returned to the kitchen, bringing with him an omelet, a couple of sausage links, and a piece of buttered bread. I had no idea that I had meat within. The freezer was where it was hidden. I'm hoping it remains excellent. Breakfast was relatively quiet, with Martin taking up the task of cleaning his kitchen since Vicky had done him the courtesy of cooking. They chatted about nothing specific while that was being done, and when the last dish had been placed in the dishwasher, he turned to Vicky. Martin bit into one of the links and told her it tasted fine. Are you prepared to speak? Ready as I'll ever be, I think. Look, Vicky, I don't want to bother you or put you in a difficult situation. It is what it is if all you are interested in is hooking up. You owe me nothing at all. I am aware of that. I simply wanted to let you know a few things. Is it okay if we do this in bed? I'll feel more at ease in that place. They walked into the bedroom together, holding hands, and Vicky sat down on the bed with her back to Martin, holding his two hands tightly. Martin, I am aware that, at the very least, we didn't actually meet until last night. I think you're a really nice guy, and I really feel drawn to you, but I have to tell you a few things. I told you that my husband left me for a 20-year-old, and that was true. But it wasn't the whole story. The main reason he left me is because I can't have children. He wanted a family and went out to find someone that could give him one. He didn't want to adopt. He saw not having kids of his own as some sort of failure, and I was the cause of it. And no, I really have no idea how he's been since the divorce. I'm a guy in his 40s with a grown daughter. I wouldn't have objected to kids, but it's no deal breaker. I'm glad to hear that. The other thing I want you to know, well, at least I want to be honest about, I'm not too proud of. After the divorce was final, I was feeling pretty bad about myself. I was getting older and I had just lost my husband to a woman nearly half my age. I'm 37, if you're wondering. I was, but no way was I going to ask. They both laughed a little. I know what you're thinking, but that's how I felt at the time. So, I set out to prove I was a woman. And if I couldn't be a woman by having children, then I was going to be a woman by satisfying men. Lots of them, and mostly anonymously. I was also feeling, well, incomplete I guess is the best word. The truth is I didn't really feel much like a woman at all. I went home with someone whenever I wanted to, and I always went home under the name Angela. This continued for several months until I began to see a therapist and realized that this behavior was self-destructive. Even after that, I kept doing it, though less frequently, until I eventually came to a place in my life where I could quit. That's what you were doing last night, right? Martin questioned thoughtfully. He wasn't passing judgment and didn't want her to believe he was, but there was no denying that she had been acting like a cougar last night. Indeed, it was. As a woman, I still have needs, and occasionally I go out to get them satisfied. But now that I am pickier about who I go with, I no longer usually wind up going with the first person that asks me. I've spent a lot of evenings going home by myself and, you know, taking care of stuff. I guess I should be happy that I passed the exam. Martin, you did. To answer your question, I would very much like to explore something more with you, but I wanted to be honest about what I've gone through. I'm truly enjoying my time with you. I was quite lucky not to catch anything when I had myself tested. Although I don't require birth control, I can provide documentation upon request from my physician. I'd like for us to both get tested and consent to being exclusive, assuming you want to try. Vicky worried that perhaps she had given him reason to be suspicious of a potential connection. But Martin sat in silence for a few minutes until he finally looked as though he were prepared to answer. I appreciate your candor, Vicky. That must have been really difficult, I know. Essentially, I owe you the same. Our experiences don't really differ that much. I was relieved to finalize my divorce, but I was still depressed over my performance shortcomings. I was facing the prospect of living a lonely life since I couldn't see how I would ever get a woman. It felt like I would have to find a lady who was considerably older than me or wait a few years. I had my own therapist, and he pointed out that, as we get older, many women lose their interest in intercourse and prefer affection of a non-physical variety. Even after everything appeared to be returning to normal and I started to feel better, I wasn't in the best of places. Just as you thought that you had to demonstrate that you were a woman, I felt that I had to demonstrate that I was a guy. I proved, to myself at least, what a stud I was by going out a lot and finding women to go to bed. It was a bout of gonorrhea and having to admit to my doctor that I had no idea what the names of my partners had been that woke me up. We got it cleared up and I started focusing on my behavior and my therapy. I wasn't any more selective than you were. Some of the women were kind of. Let's just say I rode several town bikes and had a turn with a lot of the town doorknobs. This went on for some time and I wasn't as fortunate as you were. I haven't been with a lady without protection in a long time, but I'll be happy to be tested, and I have no issues with exclusive. That would really be a deal breaker. So, then, we're going to try this. Me and you both. Knowing it wasn't a true question, Vicky batted her eyes as she questioned. Martin responded, "You bet we are," even though he knew the question was ridiculous. By noon, Martin's supply of condoms had run out. After about 3 months of dating, Martin and Vicky had an almost inevitable confrontation with Diana. Their relationship was intense. Vicky got along well with Dallas. They continued to live apart but spent every night together, and it appeared that they were getting married. They'd gone out to a club, more adult-oriented, with a DJ spinning records and inside walls that divided the dance floor from the tables so real conversation could take place. The evening was going well, with Martin and Vicky enjoying their drinks and chatting about this and that. So Vicky was confused when Martin's smile vanished and his eyes looked past her, and her eyes followed his. Diana had seen Martin almost at the same moment, and as she walked to the table, a sneer crossed Diana's face and Martin's became neutral. Even after all this time, Diana hadn't completely moved on from the divorce. She still didn't think she had done anything wrong, other than maybe not being discreet enough. However, having her needs met by another man when her husband wasn't capable of meeting them certainly didn't rank highly on her list of transgression. So she didn't really mean to be polite when she approached the table. Diana remarked, "Marty, how nice to see you," with a tone that was obviously mocking. Diana, This is Diana, my ex-wife, Vicky. As an introduction, Martin remarked, "This is Vicky, Diana," though he would have liked not to. "Diana, it's good to meet you. I've heard great things about you. Are you here now?" "Well, I haven't heard anything at all about you," Diana retorted angrily. "Diana, we're no longer married. Been for more than a year. My life is no longer your concern. Now, if it's okay with you." Martin didn't finish the phrase, but it was obvious that he was asking her ex-wife to give them some space. "Oh, Martin, of course. Wouldn't want to ruin your romantic evening. However, there's something I need to discuss with you, Vicky." "And what would that be?" Vicky inquired, flicking her eyes from Diana to Martin. "This is probably not something you should worry with. He is no longer able to handle it, so we got divorced." Martin waited anxiously for Vicky to respond, and she moved to suppress a tiny laugh. Her next comment was aimed at Martin, and she raised an eyebrow while speaking. "Is that accurate? I don't believe you brought that up." Martin merely gave a shrug. Vicky played this game. Diana believed she had them. She had thrown a spanner in Marty's marriage, just as he had with her and Bill. This was going to be fun for her, but her bliss didn't last long. Diana's smile vanished as fast as Martin's did. Diana was bewildered as Vicky and Martin exchanged subtle jabs at her depressing attempt to put herself between them. "Marty, what on earth is she talking about? Are you not informing me that the fucking thing is functioning?" "Diana, you're a champion. Better than ever. However, is that even possible? Have they identified the issue? Has a cure been discovered?" Vicky and Martin said nothing, which just made Diana giddy. "Come on, Marty. My marriage terminated because of that issue. At the very least, I believe I should know what went wrong." Martin's smile disappeared from his face. "To start with, Diana, it was your petty behavior that caused our marriage to end, not my illness. I acknowledge that it complicated matters, but you, not me, decided to take that action. Second, you're not deserving of rubbish. Since we're no longer together, my business is just that, my business. Come on, Marty. You may point the finger at my decisions all you want, and I won't argue that you're right, but if everything had been normal, I wouldn't have made that decision." "That's all right, Diana. The reason it started working again is unknown to the doctors, despite their continued testing. It happened spontaneously. They believe that whatever the issue was following my initial accident, it only needed time to resolve itself. We would still be married today if you had remained by my side during our illness, as our vows stated, and shown patience." Diana's mouth stayed wide, searching for something to speak. She was astonished to learn this. Martin had thought about giving Diana credit for the tree incident, but he was afraid she would turn it into some kind of bizarre credit. She may argue that by tricking him into hitting the tree, she had forced him to give back his performance and that he owed her something. It's best to avoid using that route. "I am unable to. It's unbelievable to me. I must truly be hated by God." Martin murmured, "He just wants to be like everyone else." "What was that?" Diana glared as she questioned. "Not a thing. Nothing at all. You now know, then. Would you kindly let us enjoy the remainder of our evening?" After a half-minute of contemplation, Diana met Martin's eyes directly. "Marty, you're right. I apologize. I made a mistake in my actions. I was conceited and self-centered. I ought to have been more resilient. I ruined a happy marriage. I apologize." Diana turned and walked out of the club, as well as their table. Vicky and Martin watched her until she was out of sight, and they were genuinely sorry for her. Martin then turned to face Vicky again. "Let's dance, my love." Conclusion. Little Ella was born roughly 9 months after Martin and Vicky got married, 6 months after the altercation with Diana at the club. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Vicky is unable to conceive. She, however, is unable to. Let me clarify. After only a few months of marriage, Martin heard the words that every guy fears to hear: "We need to talk." One Sunday morning, they were seated at the breakfast table. Vicky made breakfast every Saturday and Martin made breakfast on Sundays, depending on their schedules. Halfway through breakfast, Martin noted that Vicky seemed distracted and agitated, so he wasn't totally shocked when she placed a newspaper piece in front of him. "What's this, love? Read it, please." Martin quickly skimmed the article. It stated that when police reacted to a report of a domestic disturbance, they killed a man by the name of Wayne Jessup. About a month prior, an article described the difficult relationship between the dead and his considerably younger girlfriend, with whom he had a 3-month-old child, in some detail. Though terrible, Martin found no significance in the story. "All right, I read it." Thus, "Honey, Wayne Jessup is my ex-husband." Martin recognized that aside from that little exchange about why he left Vicky to work as a cashier or something, they had not actually talked about him. "Well, are things going well for you? What state are you in?" I was definitely taken aback. It made no sense because he'd never been abusive in our relationship, and I was just filled with such sorrow for this little girl who had to endure it. "I concur. However, how is that relevant to us?" I felt, but I didn't feel accountable. Unknown, perhaps involved. It's like I ought to lend a hand. "You are aware that occasionally the paper will contact me for information, statistics, research, or anything else related to stories they are working on. I therefore asked them to get in touch with her on my behalf as a small favor, not as a mental health professional, but as a human and an ex-wife. They provided her my contact information after I urged them to advise her that I am Wayne's ex-wife and that I would be pleased to assist her. I presume she called, reached out in some way. She did, really. For the past 2 weeks, I've been speaking with her on the phone and even in person a few times. And you're just telling me now. I apologize, sweetie. It just felt like the best option at the time, so I met her in secret the first time. After that, something about it just seemed like I would be violating her confidence. As a result, I handled it like a professional case. I anticipated telling you at some point, and now here we are. Okay, tell me what has to be known. I take it that he left you for this chick. No, really. The girl's name was Amy, and she broke up with Wayne because he was forcing her to become a mother when, it seems, she wasn't interested in having children for a while, if at all. The second girl is Carly, who I have been speaking with. Wayne began exerting pressure on her as well. Okay, so you've been talking to her. Although she wasn't sure if she wanted children either, she accepted since she enjoyed the idea of starting a family and believed he truly loved her. But he became harsh and aggressive as soon as the baby was delivered. Firstly verbally and subsequently physically. After letting it go for a while, believing it was simply the strain of raising a baby, she finally phoned the police since it was getting worse. She thought they would put him in jail to quiet him and then have a conversation the following day. Obviously that's not what happened. After learning that she had contacted the police, he began to swear and yell, taking a revolver out of his dresser. She claims she hid herself in the baby's room, believing he was going to use the gun on her, and she had no idea he was carrying a gun. After a few minutes, the police arrived, and he stepped outside to confront them. Carly remained hidden, but she had a good sense of hearing. Wayne began yelling at them to leave his land, saying that everything was okay and that they had no business being there. Carly heard them yelling at him to drop it, so it seems like he pulled the gun while they were trying to talk him down. She did not hear gunfire for very long. Carly remained hidden, oblivious to the events taking place. When the police began searching the house and calling for her, she came out. She was told nothing, but when she noticed a sheet-covered body outside the door, she knew it had to be Wayne. How harrowing that had to be. She must have been terrified to even realize that she still felt something for him. That was her statement. Wayne fired at something and even struck one of the police cars, according to the complaint. That was the end of it when they fired back. Memorable. Simply tragic, Martin said, at a loss for words. How's Carly doing now? She is doing well. I'm too close to her to be the one providing her counseling, but I did recommend someone to her. I believe she will be well. For a few minutes, everyone sat in silence, mainly simply thinking silently about the tragedy that had occurred. Martin, there's something else. Somehow I'm not surprised. Carly's true desire is not to become a mother. Not yet, anyhow. However, she is afraid to simply hand the child over to the system. Vicky, infants are adopted extremely quickly. She wasn't going to stay long. That's something we both know, but let me just say it. Carly wants me to adopt the child. Well, both of us. Naturally, I informed her that I would need to discuss it with you. But Martin, please, this baby, I want it so badly. Martin could not believe it. Because of Vicky's incapacity to bear children at his advanced age, he never imagined becoming a father again. And here is another child, perhaps even a baby, being dropped into his lap. Vicky filled the void. I had a conversation with a hospital social worker and an attorney. They added that while planned adoptions like these are uncommon, they are entirely lawful. You talked to others about this before you talked to me. Martin, if this wasn't going to work out, I didn't want to bring it to you. I wanted to speak with you after I had all the facts. And what does this Carly want out of this? If you're wondering, no money, but I would like to assist her in getting back on her feet. After all, she had recently lost her only source of support. All she wants is to continue being involved. If not exactly like Aunt Carly in Ella's life, then at least some photos and updates as she gets older. Martin was silent for a while as she considered this. He was aware of every move Vicky had made, the people she had spoken to, and the manner she had handled things. All he would have wanted was to walk this journey with her and encourage her every step of the way. And how about giving himself a further 18 years? By the time Ella graduated from high school, he would be in his 50s. Was that all the energy he had left? The endurance? He knew he would never deny Vicky something she so obviously wanted, no matter how many doubts he asked himself. Martin, talk to me, please. Martin met his wife's large, exquisite, dark brown eyes. So, what's the next step in adopting her? Ella eventually became a member of the family. Naturally, it took some time. After much red tape, the adoption was finally finalized, and the family grew to include Dallas and her new baby sister, making 4 people. Carly was able to obtain employment in a dentist's office after Martin and Vicky assisted her in obtaining a certification from a nearby technical college. There, she began dating a young man who was a patient, and it appears that their relationship could be serious. Vicky sends photos while they are apart, and they all get together a few times a year. Vicky and Martin are still content and do not intend to have any more children. When Vicky is at work, she may drop Ella off at the hospital daycare, and she visits her multiple times a day. In some way, Martin also manages to drop by and spend several weeks with his wife and children. Like, comment, Did you enjoy the long ending to this? Was the adoption the right move? Sub and bell down below, and I will see you in the next video.